Hi everyone. Welcome to Building a Better Service Portal. We really sincerely appreciate that you've chosen your service portal over booze. It's a very important decision in life. So, my name's Todd Basher. I am the Chief Den Mother at New Rocket. With a long history in software development and IT. I actually worked at ServiceNow. I directed platform product management as well as working in the custom app solution consulting organization. So after leaving ServiceNow, I joined New Rocket, and it's been fun ever since.
And hey everyone, I'm Nathan Firth, and I'm the founder and president at New Rocket and chief janitor. Prior to founding New Rocket, I did work at ServiceNow as well, where I was the team lead overseeing the development of the service portal.
And thank you all for helping me win the bet that Nathan could draw a full crowd for this session. So thank you very much. So a little bit more about New Rocket. Who are we? We are a ServiceNow partner. We specialize in service portal and user experience design. So if after this you think we have something useful and we can help you out, let us know. We'll be happy to talk to you. All right, how many of you have not deployed a service portal yet? And how many of you really want to after coming to the conference today? All right. I was hoping I get the same number of hands. All right, so New Rocket, we've been in existence as long as Service Portal has been in existence. Nathan, of course, helped build the product, so we certainly have a lot of experience over this 2-year period. We've helped to deliver over 40 portals. So we've seen a lot of the same sorts of requirements. We've seen a lot of new requirements. And this is kind of our summation of what we've learned over that period and working with numerous customers all over the world. And we truly have all different shapes and sizes of organizations. So you are getting the summarized form. At the same time, we do have some things to share. I do want to know what you're curious about. So if you have questions during the presentation, shout them out. We're going to be as intimate as 200 of your closest friends can be. But what we're going to talk about today, we've learned a few things. One is user research is really, really powerful. So we want to encourage you to do that. Another thing you'll learn is around content organization, why that's vital to your portal. Why communication builds confidence, and we're also going to touch on some implementation best practices. But if we were to summarize all of this, it really boils down to, if you want to build a better portal, you need to focus on a few things. You need to focus on navigation, the organization of your content, clear communication, and you want to base all of that on real user insights. So if you take nothing away, remember this statement, and it's going to help you as you go through your efforts. So why do we do this thing? Hopefully you're not doing it for yourself, even though it is super fun building a portal. You're really building the portal around your end users. So understanding them is vitally important. One of the things that we always stress is understanding that there are different types of users. It's not just one big mass of people that are trying to use your portal. You can segment their behavior and their needs coming to the portal. And for most of our clients, this is a minimum set of personas. You have the non-rolled users, the average employee who is coming to the portal to get help with something or request something. Then you have managerial users, and oftentimes they're depending on someone else to request things on their behalf, and they may be only coming to the portal to do approvals. Then you have administrative assistants or other people that are taking actions on behalf of someone else on the portal. And then finally, you have your IT staff who may not interact with the portal at all, but they're still an important part of the equation. For each vertical, there might be additional personas that are important to your organization. So if you work in insurance, for example, agents might be a particularly important persona for you to research and understand because their needs are going to be different. So think carefully about who is using your portal and what their needs are. Let's talk through an example here. So if we think about a manager, why are they coming to the portal? What types of goals do they have? And then if we prioritize those goals, that's going to influence what we put onto the portal. Most of our clients have managers that come to the portal, and we hear the same thing every time. They just want to come there to approve requests. So what can we do to make it super easy, super clear for them to approve requests? So that's their number one priority. Everything else is secondary. Maybe they opened a ticket. Maybe someone opened a ticket on their behalf and they just want status. So that would be their next reason for them to come to the portal. Then they may have dropped their phone in the toilet, so they need to call and get support for that. Or they're requesting some other type of service. So all of these are examples of how you think about the goals of the user and how you prioritize them. Question. What? Reports? So that's another valid reason. Most of our clients, they're interested in maybe exposing some reports, but it has not been a critical requirement for most of our clients. In other situations, maybe you're doing a customer service portal that's less internal facing, and that's more important for your clients. If you're an MSP, for example, maybe you have a customer administrator that comes to the portal and they want reports or some sort of metrics on how much the relationship is costing them. So that's an example of something that might influence it. So I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, it's just saying that you need to analyze those users in your organization. So once you compile this, you get a list of all the user types, you think about why they're coming to the portal, you prioritize that, that's going to influence your design. Or are you just gonna hop in there and start cranking out some code? No, that is a mistake. What you want to do, because it's so much cheaper and faster, is you want to go through a prototyping process. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. What we typically use is wireframes as a starting point, and this really focuses everyone on the functionality of the site and how users are going to navigate through it. So this is a great conversation point, and you can even make those interactive. If you're using Sketch to actually make the wireframes, then you can upload them into an application called Envision and add hotspots, and people can run through that. And we have an example of that in just a second. Another way that you can test or validate your assumptions about why people are coming to the portal is by surveying your users. And you don't necessarily have to be statistically valid, but you do want to get some quantitative research when you can. So we're going to go through an example of some wireframes. I'm going to turn it over to Nathan.
Cool. All right. So one thing I wanted to cover real quick before we go through these is we do hear very, very often that we need to stay close to out of the box. And one thing that I just want to make a quick point about is that staying close to out of box, or staying close to the baseline as we now call it, has really nothing to do with the design. It has everything to do with the certain types of widgets that you do not want to clone, right? The majority of the logic around Service Portal is going to be inside the shopping cart, the catalog item widget, the knowledge base. So as you're thinking through the design and you're working on wireframes, don't feel like you need to stay close to the out of box and have a big search bar with 3 buttons. You really can deviate from that and start to explore new ways of doing a layout. So I have 3 different layouts that I wanted to show here real quick, just as an example of ways that we can structure a page based on different types of requirements. So with this first wireframe that we have up here, the first thing we wanted to do, so this was actually a wireframe that we used with one of our customers, and one of the primary reasons why users came to the portal was to check the status of an order or a request. And also, it was very important to be able to showcase the status of all of their services. So we brought those up here to the top of the page. They also had very frequent news that was pulling from an external API that needed to be made prominent on the home page. So we brought that in. Because of some of the limitations that they were experiencing with search, the current search functionality wasn't working as indicated. So for example, as an example of that, we asked a question on a lot of portals, including the out-of-box, how can we help you? But in a lot of ways, when the user answers that question and they type in, I need a monitor, ServiceNow may or may not actually bring back the correct results because maybe the catalog item was actually, a Lattice or a Dell monitor, or maybe it didn't contain the proper terms. So we did make the search very prominent, but we really wanted to dive into the categories. So in this particular setup, we brought in, this is representing 6 different departments. So we brought in those as tabs and then focused on the top level categories. So hardware, software, services, accounts access, maybe permissions, and bring these in here as top categories. So this was one way that we were able to structure it for one particular customer. And as you can see, this is very different layout than what you would find in the out-of-box. But this was a particular design that happened to work really well for one particular customer. And I'll note the last thing here on the page, this is where you go when you are finally, you have exhausted your self-help options, you've gone through the catalog, you've read through the knowledge base, and you still just need to open a ticket. And this was one of the core requirements of this project, was to help deflect incidents, because based on their prior portal, a lot of the users were coming and creating generic incidents right off the bat. So a couple of quick other examples. So this is another idea that we've been playing with, where we have a good number of portals or user bases where users are coming to the portal, they don't know the difference between a request or an incident or procurement ticket or whatever, what have you, right? To them, they have this preconceived idea that they're going to come to the portal and create a ticket. So we can make it really easy for that. We can just put a big new ticket button here. So this would work really great for this specific purpose, and this could accommodate both incidents and requests and any other kind of ticket that they can create in ServiceNow. But this wouldn't necessarily be perfect designed for all approaches or for all different types of organizations. And then here on the right-hand side, we brought in the tickets. So if you're familiar with Google Docs, it kind of follows a similar pattern to that. So again, I'm not necessarily advocating saying this is the perfect design, but for certain types of users where instead of trying to change their behavior, we can create a new layout where we're operating under the preconceived ideas that they already have. And then where you have organizations that perhaps have many departments and you want to create a single type of layout where the menu can represent all of those departments. Perhaps we bring in a left-hand menu like we do here, where you can have IT, human resources, facilities, and finance, and bring in the top level categories there. So these are just some different examples of ways that you can really analyze what is the users trying to do when they come to the portal, and then on the organization side, what is it that we would like the user to do, because sometimes those are slightly different, but let's put all of those things onto a page and figure out what would the layout look like if we were to really try to address that.
Great, thanks. So how many of you have had your manager or someone higher in the organization come to you and say, I want the portal to be sexy? Yeah.
Right here.
Yeah. So one of the reasons we stress this so much, and the idea of user empathy, is just because it looks good doesn't make it functional. So you have to really take that time and understand the users so you can have a functional design first and then make it sexy. All right? Yes, question.
I guess one of the questions I want to ask is, during the initial conceptualization phase, when you're about to gather information from the different business units, what kind of questions are you asking them? Because there's always that, the end user has a particular use, whereas managers want another use, but they all want different calls to actions. They want things. I'm sure you've heard it plenty. They want things to pop, right? And so, what kind of questions are you asking so you can help narrow down what's important and what isn't important? So that, let's say, so you get people buying with.
What kind of questions do we ask? Well, we have a 3-page version and we have a 20-page version. Which one would you like? So it's a range of questions, and they're broken down by functional area. So typically, we're working with, even if it's a multi-department portal, you're talking about the same sorts of things. You're talking about service catalog, knowledge base, some type of generic request or generic incident, maybe some other ancillary functions in there, but a lot of the same stuff. And so if you break down each of the areas and you start asking questions, why are they going there? What are their frequent activities? There's lots of ways to collect user behavior data, and any data is better than nothing. So there's no perfect set, but if you want to talk to us, we'd be happy to give you some pointers in that area.
One thing I'll comment on that real quick is if you already have an existing portal, you can get a lot of information by going through some of the log tables, going and looking at the request tables, taking a look at incidents, taking a look at what the various categories were, and you can get a pretty good understanding of why your users are coming to the portal today. And you can also integrate things, especially if you already have a portal, you can bring in Google Analytics or heat mapping, where you're able to see how are people interacting with the portal. So without even talking to your users, you can tend to get a pretty good consensus of why they're coming to the portal. And as we're interviewing and reaching out to users, in a lot of ways, we're asking them very specific questions. So for example, we can present 4 different designs of a portal and say, if you were just onboarded within the organization, you're coming to the portal to order a new laptop or to onboard another employee, something like that. We can ask them very specific questions and then say, where would you click? How would you navigate this portal? So it's not, do you like it, right? Because if you ask someone if they like it or don't like it, it's all based on aesthetics. Is it pretty? But it doesn't necessarily make it functional.
So after doing the user research and really understanding who's coming to the portal, why they're coming there, the next most important thing is the content. They're coming there not to have fun, not to play the 404 page that Nathan designed. They're there to actually accomplish a goal, and they need content to do that. So that's why it's really, really important and such a focus for us. So let's talk about how the content drives the navigation. I was in a session earlier today, and they were saying, oh, it's all about search. And that's absolutely true. Most modern users are going to try searching first. But if they're not familiar with the breadth of the content that's available on the site, they need some hints. Or if their search fails or doesn't return the results, they're going to revert to either just calling you, or hopefully they're going to look at some navigation scheme that you've put there. So this is your safety net. This is the entry point for new users in a lot of cases, or this is the safety net in case search fails. So taking that user research, we're able to apply this. If we look at the priorities based on the page, and Nathan touched on this a little bit, we know just based on the hierarchy of the features on the page that this site is designed to facilitate checking status and maybe updating status. That's highest on the page, and from an information architecture standpoint, it's very much emphasized. Next, we have the categories themselves. So as the user's scanning down the page, this is the next speed bump where they're going to start understanding, okay, well, this is the breadth of what's available from the content. And if those are the popular items, hopefully, if you've done your job right, they're more than likely going to find what they need without tabbing through any of the other options. We've also exposed a certain aspect of the knowledge base here. So instead of just giving them a generic link, again, we're trying to minimize their navigation and allow them to get to their content quicker. This is, again, where you're going to use that research and say, this is the content we need up there. And then at the bottom of the page, if all else fails, you're giving them a safe word where they can go in there and get help. We've talked about categories a couple times. If you're thinking about categories and you think about your catalog as this very long trip that the customer could take to understand what you are offering, these categories act as the road signs. Should I get off here and see if there's something interesting, or should I keep going? That's really what they are. How can you improve these categories? Well, first, you want to think about lessening their cognitive load. And one of the first things that you want to do is just reduce the number of categories that they have to read. If you have 50 categories at the top level, that's too many, because after the 10th one, they're going to forget what the options are. So you really want to reduce those down to a good number of top level categories. We like to keep it 8 to 12 because mentally people can keep that in memory, but you're going to have to adjust that based on the scope of your catalog. The next thing you want to do is you want to group related items under non-technical terms, and this is super important. Can't tell you how many clients have said, well, our users can't find what they're looking for. And especially our higher ed customers, they're like, well, we use this industry standard taxonomy for our categories. What's wrong with that? Well, some academic decided that was the right term to use, but the 19-year-old who's just trying to get something to work is not going to be thinking in those terms. So again, ask your users. You want to make sure that you use the proper iconography. Don't settle for font awesome because it comes with the platform. There are literally hundreds of thousands of icons out there, and they're relatively cheap or free, so you have no excuse. And then finally, after they've clicked on something, if you haven't provided a description or examples prior to that, then certainly once they get to that category page, you can give them further description on if they're in the right place. All of these things will help them get to the right place, and if they are not in the right place, you can redirect them to the right area. Now we're going to switch over and have an example of that.
So I wanted to do something just really different that looks drastically different than the out of box, just to kind of showcase our point. So we put this portal together for you very, very quickly. But since we're talking about categories, I wanted to do something a little different in the way we structured them as well. One thing I find is, with the out of box, you have request something, I have a problem, I have a question, and it's really structured based on how you see things in ServiceNow, right, as far as the tables goes. So you really have one that's representing service catalog, another one for knowledge and incident. And we wanted to do a quick example where we really presented some of the 2 tiers of the categories right there on the home page, because I think it makes a little bit more sense to an end user if they were to come here and look at this, assuming, again, we're really focusing here on category taxonomy, not necessarily the search. But so, for example, I see here order hardware, and very quickly I can see desktops, laptops, mobiles, and tablets. Now, there's some more in here, but just for the sake of doing a cool demo, we put this in the form of a slider, and this is also responsive, so if you did pull this up on a mobile device, you'd be able to easily swipe this on your finger. But you'll notice that we have really easy to identify icons. And we are using the demo data that is out of box, so we didn't create any of the titles or descriptions. But I think this does create a pretty easy way, especially if you're coming to the portal for requesting tangible items, then I think this kind of a structure actually makes a lot of sense. For software, I wanted to try something a little different because it might be a little bit trickier to come up with subcategories around software, and especially depending on what your software catalog looks like, it could be 10,000 titles or it could be a select few. But for this quick demo, I wanted to actually bring in the items here. So we wrote this particular widget really late a couple of nights ago, so it's able to determine whether it shows subcategories or it can also potentially show catalog items. And then we did accounts access, and if all else fails, we've now created a category here that is something is not working or I need help. And I think the real point here is instead of necessarily having a generic record producer for all things everything, maybe we could ask more specific questions as it pertains to the catalog. I feel like if we have a catalog item that says report a performance problem or my device is not working, we can ask very specific questions to their problem, which is going to help with user confidence that they're filling out the right form, that this is going to get reviewed by the right person within the right department, as opposed to having the more generic record producers. So this was just a quick example that we put together with showing icons, having some categories with subcategories. And I think if we jump in here real quick, I wanted to show So in this particular example, we did start to bring in knowledge articles. So instead of having a overall knowledge portal, perhaps we use knowledge as a means of providing relevant information directly to the page that they're on. So if they're looking at perhaps a particular laptop, we can pull in articles if there's some available that pertain to that specific laptop. And then if we jump up a level here, again, using subcategories, a means of filtering based on the results that they're looking at and bringing in the icons and the description. So this was just one way where a couple of nights ago as I was putting this together, this seemed like this was a pretty good demonstration of some of the points that Todd mentioned in the PowerPoint.
Thank you. So we live in Southern California, and there's nothing worse than coming out to get in your car and there's a baby rattlesnake next to your car. This happened to me. It was awful. But it's the same experience when you've actually got a decent taxonomy, you lead the user to the right place, and then they're confronted with this awful 15-page form, or the knowledge article is just complete and utter whatever. So any knowledge-based vendors in here that sell knowledge? Okay, good. So I can talk frankly. So we've had a couple clients that went out and they purchased third-party knowledge, and I got to tell you, your knowledge should be your company's specific knowledge. Having generic knowledge, that's what Google's for. So again, when we say that articles and catalog items can make or break your portal, it's really about the content. That's what they're there for. All the categorization, all the eye candy, that's just to get them to the right place. So what do we want to suggest here? One is make simple catalog items. So anything that you already know about the user or you can default, you should. You should not collect a whole bunch of needless information. Try to streamline the forms as much as possible. Also, don't make them super complicated with a lot of business logic. If you need that, then you're doing it wrong. I'm just going to throw that out there. The next thing is that you want to make your articles organization specific. I mentioned that earlier. And then another option for you is to phrase the title of the article as a question. What is the user asking? And again, you can find this out by user research. You can go and say, here's an article, what question would you ask to get to this article? Or, out of these articles, which questions match? There's lots of ways that you can test your ideas there. And then the other thing, which is kind of controversial, and we'll touch on this a little later, is that in general, whenever you introduce multiple categories or multiple knowledge bases, it's going to complicate a lot of things. It's going to complicate the implementation. It's going to complicate your life. There are lots of good reasons to have multiple categories and multiple knowledge bases, but primarily it's around the organization's administrative needs. Very few times is it around the end user's needs. From the end user's perspective, it's just a world of information for them. So if you're breaking things up, it's because you have security that you need to enforce, or there's some behind the scenes rule that this department doesn't play well with this other department. So whenever possible, bring things together and make it work from a content perspective. All right, so that was high level user empathy. Make sure your content is very good, and you want to build confidence throughout that experience. And that does come from the design of the portal. It also comes from the content, but there are other ways that you can improve the expectations and the reduce frustrations. So this could come in the form of the catalog requests. So when someone goes to Amazon and orders an item, they're usually given a delivery date. Amazon has set your expectation, and if that expectation has to change, they're going to communicate to you. But that lets you know what to expect. Why don't we do that with our catalog items? Normally, it's because you don't know. And that's okay, but this is something, if your users are expressing frustration because they don't know what's going on, this is an easy way to get them off your back until you fail to deliver. The other thing that you can do is come on, we all know what happens. So another thing you can do is, if they're going through one of the generic channels, chat, submitting an incident, making a phone call, you can guide them to what your preferred option is, and you can give them a choice. So whenever the user has a choice, they're going to have less frustration because they're making that choice and it's not being made for them. The other thing that you can do to set expectations is, rather than having some generic email notification that goes out, you can actually provide useful information. Part of the reason why users send all of those notifications to junk is they don't say anything that's useful. So if you're actually communicating vital information like, oh, the delivery date has changed, this is your delivery date, this is actually what's going on, they're more likely to read it and find it valuable. So let's go through an example of this. I pulled these off the web. So you see on the Apple side over there, this is from their support. And they're actually guiding the users and saying the best way to contact us, the recommended way, is to actually pick up the phone. That's a pretty expensive option, but they're making a choice on that's the best recommendation. Another thing you can do within these channels is say how long the wait time is, or when that channel is available. So you're providing more information so they can make a choice. And then on the right there, you see from Amazon when you can get it. And it may not be the only option. In the case of Amazon, it's usually not. But for you, there may be only one option, and you can even give them a range. But all of that's going to increase the confidence and reduce the frustration. So let's talk a little bit more about notifications and how you can use that to inform the user and reduce the calls. So I talked about emails. Again, if your emails look like spam, they're going to treat them like spam. So do things that are going to inform them, reduce the amount of emails, and really only send those things that are critical. Also, you can use push notifications. If you're using the ServiceNow mobile app, then you can enable push notifications very easily. And then if you really want to get sophisticated, you could build your own, but we don't typically recommend that. So a lot of our, well, not a lot, but several of our clients are looking into doing more attractive email notifications. So they're actually looking into using CSS to style their email notifications, and just by making them look better, you can have the users treat them less like spam. And then also the status updates themselves. Have them go to the portal, route them to the portal. The more they're on the portal, the less likely they are to contact you. And from an organizational standpoint, one of your goals is to reduce the amount of contact. Let's face it, that's part of the job. All right, collecting feedback. Once you deliver a portal, that's not it. You're going to have to continually make updates and improve, just like every other website in the world that you go back to. So one of the ways that you can do that is by putting a feedback form directly on the portal. On almost all of our portals, we have a feedback tab that hangs out somewhere, or there's a button and that opens up a form or a survey or something where the client is collecting information, actionable information, either about the portal or about IT in general or about the service provider. And that's a great way to get feedback, because if the user has an outlet where they can say, hey, I'm frustrated, this didn't work, they're going to be less frustrated by the experience. And then surveys. If you're sending out a survey after every incident, I'm sorry, we have never seen that work. So just be more selective. There's lots of different ways that you can do that, and you can vary the types of information that you're getting, and certainly simplify those surveys. We had one client that got a fairly lengthy customer satisfaction survey down to 4 questions, and that's driving all their metrics. And we actually helped them make that very attractive with some visual indications without modifying the actual behind-the-scenes coding of that. So it is possible, and we do recommend that you strategically use the surveys rather than just blanketing everyone. All right, so this is CreatorCon. We were supposed to be talking about technical stuff, but we were. I tricked you. So all of the stuff we talked about, this is part of your job. You can't just go in there and sling some code and expect your portal to work. You have to think about all of these things because this is part of the user experience. So widgets, that's the heart of the portal, they are Angular and Bootstrap. Angular is the client-side logic, and we use Twitter Bootstrap for the styling. Please show them some love. How many of you know jQuery? Yeah. Let it go. Just let it go. So this is not jQuery. This is Angular and Bootstrap. And the more you embrace those technologies, the easier your life is going to be. And even though it's an older version of both Angular and Bootstrap, this is tried and true technology. Tons and tons of examples out there, and it's super, super efficient. I've used lots of development environments, and it is fun and very productive to develop portals. So I really love it. Now, kind of related to that, when you start getting into CSS and you start branding your portal and you make it pop and you make it sexy, there's a couple things that you want to keep in mind. You don't want it to be wildly inconsistent with your brand, and you don't want it to be the default portal. If you're just going to throw your logo on there and change a couple primary colors, it's not going to work. I can't tell you how many clients said, yeah, we deployed the portal, it didn't work, it wasn't sexy enough, and that's what they had done. They threw on a couple widgets and changed that. That's the default portal is an example of what you can do. You are fully expected to deviate. So please do that, but do it cautiously. At the same time, the more consistent you are with your brand and the other sites that the users are interacting with, the more confidence they're going to have in the technology that you're delivering and in the fact that they're in the right place. So branding's not just about making it sexy, it's actually building user confidence. So we encourage you to do it. So I mentioned credibility, and then you have branding guidelines. You just need to go to your marketing department or to your communication department and ask them, and at least find out the hex value for the color scheme. That's the minimum you can do. But you can work with them, and if they can't help you, we'll be happy to. All right, I had to throw that in there. So upgrades. Oh, I wanted to throw it over to Nathan. Go ahead, Nathan.
All right, so just as a quick demonstration of this, I wanted to take an example company. So in this case, I happen to pick Microsoft because I was on their website. And I wanted to take 30 minutes and just play around with what we could do theming the out-of-box homepage, and then contrast it by just, without creating a whole bunch of new widgets and getting too crazy. I wanted to see what we could do just within less than 2 hours of creating something completely different, but for the same brand. And again, this is kind of the same point as when we're talking about wireframing. Don't worry about, staying close to out of box. We really can explore all sorts of different directions. It really is about the user experience and how we can solve that. So this was a quick example of potentially what a portal could look like for Microsoft if we were to just simply take the out of box, change the background, and change the heading with the logo. So it's not bad. I think the graphics we picked were pretty good. They came from a support website I found from Microsoft. But I will tell you, one of the reasons why we've found that this structure doesn't necessarily, why it's not necessarily the best. And if you don't like it, you can also blame me because I did create the demo portal that ships with Service Portal. But one thing I find with this particular design, after we've now tested this time and time again, is users tend to do this. I need help. It doesn't matter if it's a request or an incident or why they're coming to the portal, it's always in the form of help, and then they immediately from there proceed to generate an incident, and they pretty much have bypassed everything that was on the portal in the forms of self-service, and your portal now at this point could have just been one giant record producer for creating incidents. So we wanted to try something a little different, and again, I spent a little less than 2 hours. It's not perfect, but this does demonstrate what you can do within the Service Portal technology very, very quickly.
All right, thanks. All right, so on the technology front, I was at a session earlier, and they were like, yeah, we cloned everything. We've been telling you, oh, you can do all this crazy stuff, and you should rearrange everything. There's a big difference for us on what you can clone and what you can't. So we're going to put that out there, and you can argue with us. That's fine. So any widget that you think is complex, it has a lot of business logic, or ServiceNow is likely to change from release to release, things like the shopping cart, how they handle catalog items, how they render forms, how they handle surveys. All of those things are complex widgets. Do not clone them unless you absolutely have to. And why? You're thinking, oh, well, the upgrade should still work, but then you're on the hook for every upgrade to see what the difference is and reconcile it. So what we do is we try our hardest to work around it. Sometimes we wrap the out-of-the-box widget and we use the wrapper to manipulate it with CSS, or we add some additional logic. And we've been successful at that with a lot of our clients. It's only when we absolutely have to that we clone those types of widgets, and then we're very explicit with our clients and say, this is what you're on the hook for, and these are the ramifications. Everything else, things like a button or a tab or a carousel, ServiceNow's not going to break that. So feel free to clone those things and own them, and feel free to create your own widgets. So you just need to be very selective. And if you're cloning just everything because you want to, change a color or something like that, there's another way to do it, and we'd be happy to go over that in more detail. So enough of a rant on that, and I touched on the multiple catalogs and knowledge bases. If you're in this situation and you have questions, talk to us afterwards. We have lots of things to say, but I'm kind of out of time here. The other thing that has come up with our clients several times is the idea of multiple portals. So you have a multiple department situation, and there's this choice. Well, do we have multiple portals, or do we try to have all of them in a single portal? And I just said, well, you don't want multiple catalogs and multiple knowledge bases, so we should always go with the multiple portal approach, because that's the out-of-the-box way to do it, right? So, no. So it's always conditional, and when you're deciding between a single portal approach and a multi-portal approach, most of the time it has to do with organizational maturity. So sometimes, just based on the timing of the onboarding of the departments, on the maturity, and a number of other factors, sometimes you have to go with a multi-portal approach. The benefit of that is it's closer to the way Service Portal wants you to work. The downside is that from a user standpoint, they have to know where to go, what the destination is, and when they switch from one portal to the other, the entire page refreshes, so it does impact the overall flow and the user experience. So there are trade-offs when you're discussing a single portal approach or a multi-portal approach, and it is a little nuanced, but we're not saying you shouldn't do it one way or the other, but you do need to weigh the pros and cons before you just say, oh, this is what we're going to do.
And one quick comment on that real quick. As we've done focus groups, one thing that we've actually heard pretty consistently is a lot of users don't actually know who the service provider is. Maybe IT is a little bit more clear, but when you're looking at health and benefits and HR and things like that, a lot of users actually said, I don't even know who offers that. Can't I just go to the portal and have it be a single, global businesses services portal where I can access everything without having to know the specific silos or who the specific service providers are. And so that is definitely the direction we've been moving in, and it's actually been working out really well.
Awesome. All right. So go out there, do your user research, build your portal around your users. You want to make sure that you have great content in there. Make sure you're effectively communicating with the users at every single step of the process, and then make your life easier by embracing best practice. And we have a whole nother talk on Thursday about widget best practices. So come see us then. And any questions? Yes?
For different portals, would it be reasonable to use different portals for, say, different language requirements? So we have Quebec, they have to have French. Would you do that in a single portal, or would you just design different?
Languages have nothing to do with the number of portals. Any portal can be rendered in multiple languages. It's tricky, but it can work. Yes?
What's on your wish list of what's missing in the current service portal offering?
Oh, I think we're going to have to tell you offline. It's a long list.
It's a long list.
Yeah, just going back to your portal with the purple theme, was that navigation on the
Was the nav on the left one widget or multiple widgets?
So the way we did that was it's a header that actually embeds the header menu widget, the out of box. So we're actually still using the out of box widgets for rendering the actual menu itself, and then we just wrote a custom header with CSS to style it on the left.
No more questions? Yes. No. Yeah, all the presentations are going to be available. They usually like send an email to everyone after, but yeah, it'll be available. Also check out Service Portal IO. We have a bunch of great content there, and more than likely we'll post it there before ServiceNow gets around to it. Yeah. Service Portal IO is our blog.
Or
newrocket.com.
Yeah.
Echo, go ahead.
So the ServiceNow kind of sales team or account exec team, they come out and convince our managers to say, use the out of box, use the out of box portal what you design. So how do you guys turn that conversation back to that now, to this kind of customization?
Well, so because in most cases in ServiceNow, it's really good to stay close to out-of-box, right? It means upgrade's going to be easy, and they have professionals working at ServiceNow that are going to determine quote-unquote best practice. But when you take a look at what does it mean to stay close to out-of-box in Service Portal, we have one customer, when we took a look at their portal, it looked identical to the out-of-box, except they had cloned every single widget, which meant upgrading was damn near impossible. But it looked just like the out of box. And then we have some of our other portals where we have some of our custom widgets, which are really just around UI componentry for buttons and layouts and creating UI. But all of the core functionality, which is the widgets, is all owned by ServiceNow. So the staying close to out of box has nothing to do with the design or the layout. It has everything to do with how many of the out of box widgets did you clone, because that's where all the logic is.
So you can also ask, well, you can wait for them to say, I want it to pop, which is usually a couple months after it's launched. Or you can say, well, would you be happy with easy upgrades and high usability and user satisfaction? And then when they say yes, then you go off and you do what you're supposed to do. Okay? Was there another question? Yeah. Well, okay, so the first question is easier. So this is really common with higher ed customers where they want part of the portal to be public. So there's a checkbox on the page and it says public. And you can do that with a lot of widgets and it will work okay. It gets tricky when you start, when the widget depends on knowing who the user is. So it's common to expose knowledge base publicly, but then when you start getting into form submissions, huge pain in the ass. So, I can talk to you forever on that one. And then the other question about putting the site down for maintenance, that's a trickier question.
I have something quick you could do.
Yeah, okay, go
Spin
ahead.
up a portal called maintenance and just swap the portal IDs. Just change 2 records and then change them back when you're done.
That's why he's the boss. Go ahead.
So, my question is that if you can have any good practice around like how to delegate the maintenance of the catalog items, like for example, if the user support or IT support department would like to maintain the hardware catalog and software catalog, like descriptions, pricing, all that, to
Yeah, I mean, well, there's Service Creator, which is geared towards, lower skilled administrators, but that gets into multiple catalogs, which, causes problems. I think with a minimum amount of training and some good ACLs, you can lock it down from a UI perspective, and then it's a matter of giving that training and having guidelines to tell them what to do, and a view of the form that's a little less overwhelming. So it's effort on your part, but if you really want to delegate that, then it's possible.
And one thing I'll comment on when it comes to multiple service catalogs, users don't even know what a service catalog is, and they're going to know a lot less when you tell them there's multiple of them. And that's where, when you start bringing in things like categories and structuring it from the end user's perspective, that's where that makes a lot more sense. So even if you end up needing to clone some of the out-of-box widgets or write your own widgets to support multiple catalogs, that could actually be, a pretty good way of building the UI, as long as you're not exposing multiple catalogs to the end user, because they're the ones who don't know what it is.
All right, one last question, and then we got to go.
So if you were to kind of average out your previous deployments, how much time would you say you spent on configuring out the box, doing layout, size, and that kind of stuff, versus widget development?
Well, our typical portal engagement for us is around 12 weeks. So it goes from, usually 8 to 16 weeks, and that variation tends to come with the amount of user research that we're doing, how long the design cycle takes. But a design cycle can take 4 weeks. It can be done as quick as 4 weeks, and then development can take 4 to 6 weeks, and then you have user acceptance testing. So that's a typical project for us. If you're less skilled in portal development, or you're biting off a really big portal, or your organization is particularly finicky about stuff, or they can't make a decision, it's going to take longer. But there's usually a fairly even split from a calendar duration between the design phase and the development phase, unless you're just getting into portal development, and then the actual implementation may take a little longer if you're doing a lot of custom development. If all you're doing is taking that design, rearranging some things, throwing some CSS, it could be pretty quick. I don't know if that answered your question. All right, so we'll take everything else offline after. Have fun. We'll see you later.